and this is kind of try to help you with kind of getting prepared to answer from Monday's assignment, the third paragraph. The first two actually we did in class. The classes Monday did, third period did, and answered the first two. And I kind of, in the first video I did on this, I read out the answers. So if you just kind of want to loosely follow that and write down what I was talking about for the answer numbers, paragraphs 1 and 2. I didn't really put up a really good question for the third paragraph from Monday's assignment, but what I'm trying to get you to look for is kind of what steps were taken in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s by African Americans to kind of bring about the civil rights legislation that was passed in this 1964 Civil Rights Act and also the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That kind of put the full effect, or it required the all of America to follow the 14th and 15th Amendments that had been passed in the 1860s, that had originally, through the Constitution, had guaranteed civil rights and voting rights for African Americans, but through Jim Crow laws, those had been the Constitution had been ignored, and the Supreme Court case Plessy versus Ferguson essentially struck down the amendments with the separate but equal decision, and it took till 1954 that you had Brown versus Board. So here are the questions here that kind of are going to get us ready to answer the third paragraph, or put together some sentences for the third paragraph. The first one here: how did World War II affect the civil rights movement? Okay, so African American soldiers over in Europe experience equality. Same thing during World War I. They also put their lives on the line during the war, and they came back, and it was still the same old South, and things were just exactly, so they had risked their lives, and they still came to a country that really didn't treat them as equals. So that was kind of something that really kind of created a movement towards pushing towards equality in this country. That was the first one here. Two, MLK had seen how Gandhi was so successful with nonviolence in India, and so he kind of copied that. It was very, very effective in the different types of protests that were conducted during the 50s and 60s. What was the impact of segregation on African Americans? Again, separate but equal was not equal. African American in schools, received much less funding than white schools. Right there alone is enough to kind of answer that question. It made it so the education that African American received was not the same, and of course the having movie theaters, maybe having a black only section of the movie theater, it was just created this atmosphere of degradation, and kind of creating an inferior system in the South. Number 4, why was the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott successful? Really didn't talk about this too much. Rosa Parks kind of inspired the boycott. We saw MLK talking about it in some of the videos. But the reason it was successful was because without the money from the African American riders, the bus system was not solvent, could not make money, and so they would have been forced to shut down if they didn't have the African American riders. And so they eventually had to desegregate the bus system. And it was caused by the economic impact of not having the African American riders on the bus. That's number 4 there. What did Brown versus Board of Education do to enable desegregation? We've already talked about this a little bit, but overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, the 1896 ruling, separate but equal. It said that separate but equal is not equal, and that it called for the desegregation of the schools in the South. It was 1954, and this didn't even begin to start happening until the mid-60s. Or early 60s, the desegregation in the South of the schools. What were examples of 3 different types of protests that were conducted against segregation? Okay, so you have the sit-ins, where you're in a segregated restaurant and you go in, you sit down at the counter, you're African American, you don't expect to be served, you're just sitting there, and media gets called. Okay, it shows, the media shows that, the African Americans, being beaten and pulled off their chairs, and creates a lot of imagery that's is kind of tough to see for the rest of the country, even the rest of the world. Okay, because television really brought the civil rights movement to the whole world. Then you have freedom marches, freedom rides. Okay, freedom rides, you start to get on a bus in, say, Chicago, and you head down to Alabama, and you have as you get further and further south into where segregation exists, it becomes more and more apparent that that people are getting more and more upset about having a bus that has both African Americans and whites on it. And again, you have an issue there with challenging the Jim Crow laws that existed in the South. Again, the freedom marches, again, sometimes the protests there would be water cannon might have been used, or you might have had dogs being used, and it created just a lot of imagery that was very negative for the South and for the rest of the world, and it put a lot of pressure on politicians in Washington, D.C. to kind of begin to unwind. Obviously, the Constitution was not being followed, and the different amendments were not being followed. 14th and 15th Amendments weren't being adhered to if people are peacefully protesting. So I think we talked about number 7 a fair amount. What media just, again, television, brought the images of some of these protests to the world. Number 8, what were the 2 acts of Congress that finally enforced the 14th and 15th Amendments? Okay, so this would be the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So here we have, and again, those 2 acts were what the civil rights movement were trying to achieve. They were trying to kind of get something more to kind of overturn some of the laws in the South that had violated the 14th and 15th Amendments in the period after after Reconstruction. Reconstruction, again, was from 65 until 77, that 12-year period where the North was down in the South trying to kind of reestablish, society as a desegregated society. And again, it didn't really hold up after the North left. And so you had, by 1896, the South had really separated African Americans from whites in all aspects of the South. So again, this last paragraph in class, I gave a sentence to kind of get you focused to answer this. And again, you're talking about what African Americans did after World War II to kind of make civil rights happen in this country. And the sentence I did for the first period was, after World War II, African Americans began the process of challenging segregation in the South. So it's just a very simple sentence that kind of sets you up to kind of talk about the different things that are in this, that were discussed in these different questions, these focus questions for this paragraph. So try to give this a chance and see how you do. And I am going to end the video here. Hopefully that helps you out.